This is Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? Today is going to be a very fun day, not only because this episode is airing the week of my birthday, and who better to have on the week of my birthday, but my new friend, Cynthia. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, and happy birthday. You're a baby. We're not going to talk about the number. We don't have to talk about the number, but you're a baby.
I'm really? You think I'm a baby?
I don't want to guess ages. I think we're all smarter than that, but I think either that or you've got the fountain of youth.
Let's actually do this. How old do you think I'm turning?
I'm going to say 34.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, okay. What is it?
39.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
No.
39.
Oh, so this is the year before.
I
the
know.
big one.
But here's the thing is I'm not afraid of 40 at all.
No.
Like I'm, because all my friends are, like my best friend turned 40 last year, and my husband turned 40 last year. Actually, three of my best friends turned 40 in the last year, and then like now all of it's I'm in the span of life where all of my friends are either about to turn 40 or in their 40s.
Yep.
And I was admittedly very scared of 30. Like 30 terrified me for some reason. And I don't know if it was because I was pregnant while I was turning 30. So I had a lot of emotions, but I just, for some reason, like 30 sounded very scary. Whereas to me, I'm like ready to show the world that your life does not end when you turn 40. Because I think culture, I'm going to be real serious for a second. I think culture tells us that when women turn 40, they just like wash up and dry out and are just no longer fun. And we're just old and decrepit, and we can't be hot or fun. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just saying, like, we're washed out, Cynthia.
No, it's just our ovaries. Like that just happens in the late 40s. But I hear you loud and clear, and here's what I'd say to that, and I agree. I think here's the deal. I figured out in my 30s, I was still like I was trying so hard to become, and in my 40s, I was like, okay, like it is what it is. I feel like you settle in hard in your 40s, and I don't mean like settle, like oh well, but I mean like 30s. I feel like they were still like, what's everybody else doing? Am I keeping up? Do it, blah blah blah. Are my kids keeping up? Am I, all the things? 40, I'm like, you know what, like. I know who my people are, but more importantly, I know who I am. Yes. And it is so freeing, I think, in 40s. And so I'm a girl who just hit the next one in the 50s. And let me tell you something about the 50s. The 50s are even so far, I'm barely there, but the 50s so far, I have the freedom of the 40s, but then you have the pains of the 50s. Like my feet are starting to hurt a little bit. And do I have bursitis? And oh my gosh, do you have to get a colonoscopy? I don't know.
That's like
it's all, oh, you do. Yeah, you do. Cause do you have family history, right?
No, I do.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So I don't know. I would just say to anyone, if you're in your 30s, like if it feels still stressful and kind of hard, just know in your 40s, it's really nice. Cause you get some freedom in there.
Like, I'm just going to say something like a little unfiltered. Like, I feel like your 40s, you're just kind of out of F's to give. I'm just saying something real unfiltered right now. I feel like 40s is the decade that you are just out of F's to give.
Yes.
And you're just like, I'm over it. And like,
please really write that book. Write that book in your late 40s. Oh my gosh. I'm number one to endorse. So please write that book in your 40s.
But I mean, like, I just, again, I'm not there yet, but I'm almost there. And I've I have a few F's to give left, but I'm almost out of them. And I feel like once I hit 40, they're just going to be gone. And I'm just going to, and then when you're like we're really fast forwarding, but then I feel like once I'm in like my 70s and 80s, then it's like, I'm in the negatives. Like I just am like, but like in the best way.
Yeah, that's why, like, when your parents get in their 70s and 80s, that's why they're so unfiltered. And you're like, it's like the most magnified version of their younger selves. Yes. And you're like, oh, wow, it's like looking at the sun. Can you please simmer that down? And then you're like, you know what? Like my dad's in his 80s, and now I'm like, you know
Oh
what,
my
you can do whatever the heck you want because you made it your 80s, and so I can't even roll my eyes. I feel like, yeah, he's entitled to that.
Yeah. Okay. So, quick story, and then I promise we're going to actually get into a real conversation. But this is too fun, and this
Sure.
is a podcast, so we do what we want. So, when we're recording this,
Uh-huh.
the so as of like right now, uh, on this past Saturday, um, one of my best friend's daughters was getting ready for her senior prom, and so her daughter and then her 3 friends, because like apparently not a lot of kids go with dates these days, like a lot of times it's just
Okay.
like friend groups. And
Yeah.
so the friend group, they all come over to our house and they were all getting ready for the prom, and then we did pictures on the front porch and all that stuff.
Right.
And while they were getting ready, I was like, I got to put on some music because y'all are getting ready for prom. Like y'all, because I walked in the house and they were already here because this is the kind of like friend we have. Like I wasn't even home and they like
Yeah.
came over and they were getting ready.
Love it.
So I come in the house and like there's no music playing. And I was like, what are y'all doing? Like you're getting ready for prom. You need to put some music on. And so like I put a playlist on that was like 2024 hits and it was not good. And so finally I was like, you know what? I'm going to put on the music that I was getting ready to for my prom. And
Okay.
so I
Yeah,
put
let's
on
hear
the
it.
hits of the late 90s, early 2000s. And
Yes.
let me say, there were some bops. And also, there were some songs that I probably should not have been listening to in high school, but it's fine. And that is a conversation for a different day. But anyway, I mean, like, Get Low came on.
Okay,
And
yeah, I was just gonna say I need to know a couple of the songs. What were they?
so we
Okay.
had like,
Wait, is Get Low like Get Low, Low,
Get
Low?
Low, no, the Get
No.
Low, like Lil Jon's, like,
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah,
the
yeah.
window, to the wall. And then, like, it was,
Yes.
I did put the clean version on because I'm at least still somewhat of a good parent because my kids were present. So I did have so it was bleeping out some of the more like,
You cared about you in that respect, you did have an F to care,
I did
'cause
have.
you didn't want that going. Yeah,
Right,
okay.
yeah. So
Mhm.
I put on the clean versions. So I've grown up and matured some in that I'm
Yeah,
putting
yeah,
on
yeah.
clean versions of songs that I was not listening to the clean versions of when I was getting ready for prom. And so anyway, so I put like, it was like Rough Riders Anthem and like No
Mhm.
Diggity by Blackstreet and
So
yeah, all just real
so
good stuff.
great.
So
And
fun.
what was their response? Were they like, "What's this?"
They were kind of like unsure. And then
Mhm.
I don't know. It was like I got sent back to the year 2002 and I
Mm.
was like, we're
Let's
doing
do
this.
this.
This
Let's
is
do this.
fun. And so I was dancing, mortifying my own children. The high schoolers, I think, were vibing with me, but I don't know.
We're gonna choose to believe they were vibing with you because
I
you know what? Who pays for this house? You do. So you play your music.
Thank you, Cynthia. So, so anyway, I promise this story has a point. And so anyway, so we're having fun and we're laughing. And then I kind of made the comment. I was like, you know what? Like, I actually really cannot wait to someday, like, either I don't want to be in a nursing home, but like if I am,
Yeah.
I'm gonna lead the dance party. And like when the millennials and like when the Gen Xers,
Mhm.
the millennials, and like yeah, when those 2 generations are in the nursing homes, like, our dance parties are going to be on fire.
For real.
I'm just saying, like, are there going to be people in their 80s grinding? I don't know. I think it's possible.
Twerking at a minimum.
At a minimum. At
Yeah.
a minimum. I mean, when I am 85, I'm for sure gonna be singing the uncensored version of Get Low. Like, and I'm gonna be like, "What are you gonna do? I'm 85."
Yeah. Yeah. Because I have earned the right to do this. Okay. Well, on that note, I love that. And on that note, I'm going to say this too. And we can talk about this, but I have, a huge range of age of kids. But my youngest is still in that kids bop age where they listen to the kids bop.
Yeah.
And my husband and I get cracked up because it's literally like the most inappropriate lyrics, but they somehow think it's okay that you have like a 4-year-old singing it in a high voice or whatever they do. And somehow that's okay. And my husband's like, they're like, my life's been hard and I've been up all night dreaming about you. Mike's like, no, this is not kids bop material. So we chuckle all the time about that.
Oh yeah, so good. Okay. So this is so fun. This is why I knew I wanted to have you on because we're just 2 gals. We're just chatting about life and
Yes.
it's so good. Okay, and I think this actually is the perfect segue into you giving us the Cynthia 101 because you released your first book this year, Life is Messy, God is Good. I've had the opportunity to read it. It's so fantastic. It's You really are my people.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
so Cynthia, will you give us the Cynthia 101 and then we're going to dive in and continue this incredibly fun conversation.
Okay, yeah, yeah. The quick version is I am well, you know my age basically. I've been married for 22 years. My husband Mike, we met in law school, and we have 3 kids. Our oldest is in college at the University of Texas, and our middle is a high school boy. So we have a girl at the top, high school boy in the middle, and then I have a first grader. So life is funny when you're trying to figure out like menopause and the first grade field trip. I mean, life's funny. And
So
so
much.
I know we adopted our little one from foster care. Was not we were not adoption minded, but God was, and so I'm so thankful for that. And so here we are now with we've got my oldest just turned 21, my youngest is 8, and that's it over here. I used to be a lawyer, not anymore. I have a podcast now called Mesmerized. Before that, I had one called Pardon the Mess. I did forever with Christian parenting, and then I switched over to one called Mesmerized now with 2 S's, like mess. My book is Life is Messy, God is Good, and that's it. There you go.
I love it. And quick plug is I actually have been on both of your old podcasts, both
Yeah.
Pardon the Mess and Mesmerized.
Yep. I've interviewed you
I
a few
know,
times. It's been fun.
so fun. We're so fun. Okay, so I want to obviously dig into where you are now, but I have to ask, like the law school journey. Like, tell us about that. Like, what were you always like? I'm going to grow up and I'm gonna get the JD and I'm gonna practice law and then how did God clearly rewire you away from that?
Yeah, yeah. I really think my parents went on hiatus. I think they were in their 50s when I went to college, and apparently they didn't have any more of those to give either. No more F's for my parents either, because literally I'm like, did y'all check out when I was in college? The degree I got, I'm not gonna say what it is because people probably listening have it, but the degree I have, I was like, what did I think I was gonna do with that? And so I think I graduated and I had nothing better to do. I'm like, I think I'll go to law school. And so I got in. I don't know, go figure. And so I went, and that was that. And that's where I met my husband. And there's no lawyers in our family. I don't really know. I don't think I knew what I was doing. I think my parents had thrown in the towel.
Yeah.
That being said, I went, and obviously I feel like the Lord, he has a plan. He uses all things. I practiced law for probably 8 or 9 years. I was not very good. Now, the partners in my firm, I mean, I'm just telling you, I wasn't very good.
I love
The,
this so much.
the partners in the law firm probably would have said I was good. And but I was like, I just like when you do something that's outside of your gifting, I'm just gonna say that. I'm gonna lay this out there
Ooh.
for everybody. When you're doing something outside of your gifting, um, I mean, I don't think I knew as much in the moment, because now that I'm doing something in my gifting, I'm like, oh, now I get it. It
Mhm.
was so hard for me, but I practiced law for many years. The funny thing about it, let's fast forward, the Lord kind of called me in a different direction, obviously. But what I do now, when I was a lawyer, I took 1 billion depositions. I mean, there's nobody that's taken more depositions, flown all over the country, asked a lot of questions under oath to people, and got helped our cases, whatever. Well, a podcast is really just a deposition, everyone. At
Yes.
the end of the day, you ask questions, you listen, and you ask some more questions, right? And so I feel like the Lord, like, it has taken that skill set and moved it into what I'm doing now. And then obviously had to write a lot as a lawyer, and now I write books. So there you have it. But the short version on why I moved out of law was the Lord I was sitting in a downtown Dallas law firm, and I mean, it was a year of partnership, and by all accounts, I would have made partner and all of that. And I was just sitting in a downtown Dallas law firm, and I just felt like all of a sudden, like, it just like swooped over me, almost like this sense of like, there's got to be something more. And I'd never had that before. And I stopped, like, enough that I stopped, and I was like, what is this? And I remember like thinking, I'm a girl who grew up in church. So I'm like, is this what that holy discontent is that everybody talks about? Like, I never really knew what it was, but, and I just started right there. I was like, Lord, if you have something different for me, I'm willing to do it, but it has to be really obvious. What would that be? And just fast forward all these years later, I end up not practicing law. We got involved with foster care. It was involved with a ministry for a long time where I wrote a lot of parenting resources for them and prayer journals. End up starting a podcast. Like, I'm the least technologically savvy person you've ever met. And when we decided to start a podcast, my first one, I was like, what? I mean, I didn't think I was going to do it. I was like, y'all should start one. And they're like, well, you should do it. And here we are now. So it's just kind of one, I always like to say, like, whatever the Lord's calling you into, whatever that thing is, like if you're sitting in a space where you're like, I feel like there might be something next, the Lord's calling me into something next. It doesn't take a like, yes, I'm all in. It takes the most reluctant yes. And the Lord will take that and run with it. And I'm just so grateful in so many ways that the Lord has just kind of changed course.
Oh, there's so much I want to unpack here. This is so good because you said something that I was just like, "Ooh, that's fire." Is when you said like when you're doing something that is not in your gifting, and I think that there are so many people who have followed the quote unquote like American dream formula,
Mhm.
go to school, get the good grades, graduate with, top of your class, get the scholarship, go to the good university, major in the good thing, find a husband or a wife and like do the career, the 9 to 5, the whatever
Mhm.
and just like go up the corporate ladder for
Mhm.
how many years? And I understand that this is not everybody's story and
No.
even those stories tend to not be that linear, but just generally speaking, I feel like there's a lot of people that have kind of done things throughout their lives that are based on expectations that they've kind of felt like either parents or society or whatever have put on them. And they're doing something and they're just miserable. And so
Mhm.
they're getting to the end of their lives. And I heard actually in a sermon this morning, like a pastor was talking about how he's like, I've, been to a lot of funerals. He's like, I've been in a lot of hospitals with somebody on their deathbed. I've never once heard somebody say, "Man, I really wish I'd been at work more."
Mm.
You know what I mean? And so, like,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that we tend to do that are outside of our gifting, and we know it. And when you actually maybe sometimes give that reluctant yes, even though it is to do something that is within your gifting, it can feel really scary.
Yeah.
And so I want to just unpack that for a second because I think that there are a lot of people that maybe feel that. And so can you just kind of encourage or just talk to the person
Mhm.
listening who is driving or folding
Mhm.
laundry and they're like, I'm not doing something in my gifting, but
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know what that is.
Yeah.
How do you begin to decipher that? Because I do think that there are times that we can even be doing something in our gifting and
Mhm.
feel times where we're like, oh, this is really hard. I don't love this part or whatever. But
Mhm.
when you're, yeah. So the person who kind
Yeah,
of feels stuck, can you talk to them?
for sure. I'd say a couple things is I'm so my husband is still an attorney, and I'm so thankful because at the end of the day, he pays the bills. So I'm glad for that, right? So keep that up, keep going to the firm. And so this is not a anti-established job kind of
Right.
thing I'm getting at, right? Like I understand, like there's so many people, my husband included, they're called to go to a place every day, and they're working a job that at times feels mundane and frustrating and all the other things, but that doesn't mean that's not worthy.
Thank you.
I would
Yeah.
just say so I would say like for many of us, that's what it looks like. For me, I did that for years, but I wasn't good at it. And I know that now. And so what I would say to the person who's stuck is this is important. Figure out what the narrative is you're listening to and figure out what lies you're buying into. I've spent a lot of time in my life realizing that there's certain lies that I believe in life that have dictated how I do things. It's interesting. I always kind of tell the story of this girl, Terry. I overheard her in high school say to a group of people that the only reason I got into the college I got into was because my parents knew somebody. And
Mm,
so I was like, how dare her say that? And by the way, I went to a good college, but I didn't go to Harvard anyone. So it wasn't like my parents had to have connections to get me in, but that stuck with me. And so I went into a college and I was like, well, I'll show Terry. I'm going to get a 4.0 in college back when a 4.0 was still a 4.0. And so I did. I mean, I studied and I got a 4.0 and then I'm like, I'll show Terry. I'm going to take LSAT and get in law school. And so I studied hard and I got in law school and I'll show Terry I'm going to get a job in a top tier law firm in downtown Dallas. And I did. And at some point you wake up and realize like I've been proving a point to someone who hadn't thought about me in like 20 years, everyone. And so I wonder, I mean, was that the only reason I did it? Of course not. But at some point I think you need to step back and say, okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? What's the narrative I'm listening to? Whether it's something I've heard many years ago,
mm,
whether that's something I'm telling myself, maybe it's some family baggage I'm dealing with. What is the narrative? And then line that truth up with God's truth. And
mm,
when you line up your truth, what you're believing, the messaging, the narrative with God's truth, then it becomes kind of evident. And for me, I realized like, what was I good at? What was I gifted at? What am I not good at? I was in law school and I met my husband and the Lord used it. And I believe the Lord takes every path and can make good from it. But I'd been trying to prove something, not just to Terry, but kind of to myself for many years. And the Lord's like, listen, you don't have to prove who you are. I've already given you identity. And so I walked away from a really good job that made a lot of money, and went into something that really I wasn't sure and didn't make and continues to not make a lot of money, as you know. But boy, when you walk into that place of fulfillment and knowing God's using you for the missional things, um, it's a game changer. And so I would just encourage you to figure out what are the narratives, what are some of the lies you're believing. I even wrote about this. I think in my book I wrote about this. I should know this, y'all. So that's how great I am at promoting my book. But some of the lies I've been believing that I've had to really line up with truth. And I'm just going to read them real quick to y'all. I'm going to list them out. But like I've believed the lie that I'm defined by the success and failure of my kids. I believed a lie that ordinary is not enough. I believed a lie that everyone has to love and accept and approve of me. Like
Mm.
those are some of the narratives over the years. And so I would say, step back wherever you are, even if you don't feel stuck. It's always a good exercise to say, like, what are the narratives, Lord? What are the lies I'm believing? And what's the truth you would have me believe? And I think if you can live in God's truth and measure success by God's truth, He will honor and change your course very frequently.
Oh man. Ooh, we just had some church up in here. Yeah, I feel like that is such a common thing that I hear so many people struggle with, wrestle with. And man, I have done that.
Yeah.
Uh where I have written a narrative in my head where I'm trying to prove myself to somebody who is
Mhm.
not even in my life and hasn't been for a very long time. I have 100% done that. And honestly, I'm just going to say this, that I bet you every single person in listening has done the same thing.
Yeah.
And if you're saying, "No, I haven't," it's you in denial, okay? I'm just saying, like, and it's not like I'm saying it might not be as extreme as, like, getting a 4.0 in college and going
Yeah.
to law school, but, like, we've all done something at some point to prove ourselves to somebody else who
Mhm.
doesn't actually care about us. We
Yeah.
we just have. We
Yeah.
just have. But I really love how you talk about and the other thing that I really wanted to unpack from that was like, um, that you talked about how God didn't waste that time. Like, and
Mm.
I
Mhm.
this is a common theme. This is something I talk about a lot on this podcast with so many different guests with a million different backgrounds.
Mhm.
And that is, it's just God wastes nothing. And how those skill sets that you got through doing all these depositions, now you're doing in a podcast. And, and I think about that too in my own life. Like I worked in radio and I worked in media
Mhm.
and marketing for a long time. And I did uh I actually had this entire series at both my radio and my media job where I had to interview people for these short either articles
Yeah.
or interview series. And so I had to make these, anywhere from 4 to 8 paragraph articles or these 6 to 8 minute radio spots interesting, and I had to interview a lot of brick walls. And so like I'm
Yeah.
just being
Yeah.
honest,
Totally.
because sometimes, like, I remember I did this entire series for the radio station where I had to interview all these business owners around town as like a highlight for these small business things. And let's just be honest, sometimes small business owners are not super interesting depending on the business they own. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I can appreciate that.
and so I had to, pull out some really interesting information. I remember like later when I left radio and I left media and I was just doing the blog, and I remember my husband saying like, "You're just so good at talking to people and interviewing people. Like you really need to do a podcast."
Mm.
And so I've taken a lot of those skills that I thought in a lot of ways I thought were
Yeah.
wasted. And yeah, man, so good. So good. Okay, well, I'm taking a little bit of a turn here, but not really.
Okay.
And this is actually something that I had highlighted in your book, and I think it's actually works perfectly from what we were just talking about. When you're walking in, for the person who is walking in doing something that they're not in their gifting, or they're struggling and they're wrestling, trying to figure out like what is their gifting, what are they trying what is God specifically calling them to do? And a lot of times it requires prayer and discernment. It requires spending time with the Holy Spirit and really learning to listen to God. And the whole chapter that I had actually really wanted to highlight was chapter 12 in your book, Life is Messy, God is Good. And that is Thigh Masters and God's Voice. And I loved this chapter so much. And you open up every chapter with a messy truth. And I had highlighted this first one, and it says, it's in God's very nature to speak to us. But as our world gets busier and noisier and harder, it simply takes a little more intentionality to hear him.
Mm.
And then there was another paragraph that I'm going to highlight in a second. But one of the things that I had seen actually this weekend that somebody said and was just like, it's a whole lot harder to hear from God when you've already decided what you want him to say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I just felt like this chapter speaks directly to that, about how sometimes we have allowed our busy, loud, chaotic lives to crowd our mind, to crowd our thoughts. And so when we actually want to hear from God, when we want to know what he says about something, or get his guidance on something, we've either, one, filled our mind with way too much noise to be able to hear from him, or two, we've already decided what we want him to say, and so
Yeah.
we can't actually hear him talk. And so I wanted you to kind of share this story about the thigh master that you share in this chapter, because it's such a
Yeah.
great illustration of this. And so would you share that?
That's funny. I've done a million interviews for this book and nobody's ever asked me about that story. So that's so interesting. Way to
I
go,
love it.
Molly.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, my parents, I think were scared in high school for me because I literally had zero motivation. That was before Terry insulted me, everyone, and so apparently I was doing nothing, and so they eventually got me a job working at this doctor's office, and I think they had great aspirations that I might go to medical school, which was not to be, and so I worked there, and I was so bored and hated every minute of it. It was a friend of my parents, and he was very patient with me, but I had one of those thigh masters, and you guys, this is way back. You're going to have to probably Google search this, but they, like Suzanne Summers, this
Oh yeah.
old
Oh
timey,
yeah.
you know who I'm talking about, like actress, whatever, from Three's Company, which I wasn't allowed to watch because they were living and they weren't together, not married. And I grew up in like the Beaver Cleaver house. So it's a whole thing, everybody. But there's a thigh master that this girl invented, and you would, like, I don't know, it's just like a little contraption that you could do back and forth between your knees, and it would like tone your thighs. And I decided, while I worked at that doctor's office, sitting there so bored, I was going to use that thigh master every day underneath the desk, and I was going to have the best thighs known to man, because I was that age where that's all that mattered, right? That was my biggest concern, was how my thighs looked. And so I did that day in and day out. And I'm going to tell you something, people, I killed it with, I had thighs that, I mean, they were screaming hot for at least, 6 months. And so that's all I did. And I joke in the book about this whole thigh master thing, but it was the repetitive motion. There's no huge secret to that repetitive motion of those muscles that made have toned thighs, and how this is a repetitive motion we need in order to hear from God. And just like I talk about this, I think in that chapter as well, like we want to hear from God, but it gets so loud. And think about like when you have a baby, and if the baby's screaming, it is not like in your best interest to scream louder than the baby. That doesn't work. You whisper, right? You get quiet and you're like, okay, listen, are you there, baby? Like, it's okay. You're going to be fine. And the baby starts to calm down. And I think that's what the Lord is doing, is he just gets quiet, right? And he's waiting for us to listen. And so I would say this, like, if you're trying to hear from God, if you're trying to follow God, if you're trying to do the things in your giftings, if you're trying to figure out like, what's my next yes, then you've got to be putting foundational things in place in your life in order to hear from God. And the foundational things are not exciting, and you don't get a lot of attaboys for them. I joke about this also in the book about, like, I live in Texas, and so we had to have our foundation fixed on our house. Very common in Texas. It cost us like 2 Disney trips worth of money to have our foundation fixed. And I talk about how, I thought it would be 1 or 2 piers they'd put in to kind of raise our foundation. They put in like 19. I'm like, what kind of death trap is this place? And at the end of the day, like, here's the thing. Did we want to pay for that? No. Has any person come by once walking their dog and been like, hey, nice foundation? No. And nobody's come to dinner and been like, hey, y'all had a good year last year. I can tell. I noticed your foundation. Nobody's talking about it. Not one person cares about it. But if we have fancy hardwood floors or pretty, custom window treatments or whatever furniture, like, none of it matters if the foundation isn't stable. And that's what Jesus is saying when he's saying, like, you build a house on rock, you build one on sand. The storms come, one on sand, it doesn't make it, because the storms reveal our foundation. And so my challenge to you is go do the foundational things that are going to help when the storms come, when you're called to different places, to hard places, when your marriage gets rough, your finances get tight, have you done the foundational things, which include things like spend time in God's word? It includes things like spend time in prayer, learn to hear the voice of God. It means being willing to stand alone and go do the things God calls you to do when it does not make sense. Leave the law job that's paying a lot of money to go work in ministry because you've set the foundations in place and you know when you hear God's voice. And this stuff doesn't happen just one day on a whim, like, oh man, I think maybe God's. No, it happens in the quiet moments where you're putting foundational things in place that feel insignificant, that not one person has noticed. No one's going to say, attaboy, way to go this morning. I noticed you spent time memorizing scripture. No, but those are the ways that pave the Lord's ability to come into your life and make changes and do the things that have eternal significance and they matter. And don't buy into the lie that the ordinary stuff isn't significant, because it is.
Yes, yes, yes. But you talk about this where you quoted A.W. Tozer, like it's the nature of God to speak. It's who he is. He created us to listen. And so, but you said, we've got to train ourselves, and this takes training. That's such an important piece of this. Like you were saying, you said when day after day and week after week, we posture ourselves to hear from God while also living in expectation of hearing his voice. We're putting in the muscle memory for a life that's filled with God ordained moments of clarity, purpose, and community. Knowing this, I wonder how different our lives would be if we lived each day expecting to hear from God. What would you do or not do if you knew God was going to speak to you today? What would you ask him about? How would you pray differently? How would the people around you be changed if you allowed God to speak into everything you have planned for the next 72 hours? Oh, it's so good because yes, like when we continue to train ourselves, and I think sometimes like especially I think I misunderstood this in my early walk. Like for the first few years that I started walking with Jesus, like I think I struggled to, while I had very early on in my walk, I had some pretty big God moments, if that makes sense. Like I had some moments where God was like punching me in the face because I was down. I was at my rock bottom. I was at the place where I needed him the most because I was so broken. And I think in those days, it was really easy for me to have these like big, miraculous kind of God moments where I have some stories from early on in my walk where I just are unexplainable because they were full blown God stories.
Yeah.
But then when I started to get comfortable, when I started to get complacent, I stopped kind of hearing from him. And it's not like things were bad, but I was just comfortable and I was complacent and I wasn't expecting him like I did in those early days. So this was like, 2010 was those early days. And then 2018, again, probably let's call it 2014 to 2017, I'd kind of gotten in that like complacent bit. And then 2018, the rug is pulled out from under me when I have 2 very late pregnancy losses. And so I'm once again at that place of desperation where everything, my expectations of life have been pulled out from under me. And once again, I have some of those God moments. And so what it did was it actually kind of woke me up to like, am I actually living every single day, whether I'm in crisis or not, whether I'm suffering or not, am I actually living every single day with an utter need and desperation for God, not just in those like really hard moments?
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, like I'm not, so I would challenge you on 2 things. Like I look back on my most desperate, hardest moments. Foster care was one of the hardest things I've ever walked.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, I miss it. Gosh, you just drank your Diet Coke. It just made me so happy. I love Diet Coke. I forgot we're soul sisters on that. That literally, Diet Coke derailed me from a spiritual point, people. That's how much I love it. That
I
is
love it
the
so much.
problem. That's the crux. Okay.
No, great.
But I look back on that and I miss so many of those moments, those hard foster care moments, because I mean, I saw God. Like I saw him in
Yes.
every song I heard on the radio. I heard from him. Because I was seeking him. And I would just say this, like, I think there's a couple things. One, don't be scared to put your yourself in places where if God doesn't show up, you're in trouble. Like
Mhm.
those are the places where you know and hear from the Lord. Second of all, the complacency, it happens for all of us. I feel like I'm kind of in one of those places now. But if you have one of those things in your life that the Lord's never taken away, I'm going to give you just, I don't know what your thing is, but let's say you've just never felt like the finances are stable, or maybe you've got a kid that's hard, or maybe you've got a kid with a learning difference, like whatever that thing is, and you're like, Lord, it's so frustrating because in a snap you could fix it. I would just challenge you to say that there's probably some intentionality in why he's
Right.
not. Like if he doesn't, you need those things in your life where if the Lord doesn't show up, you're in trouble. And so instead of begrudging them, I say lean into those and say, okay, Lord, like if this is my thing that I'm gonna fight, then I want to learn to see you in it, and I want
Mm.
to see you show up in it. And instead of wishing them away, even trying to pray away some of these things, I would say lean into those, because I think that's where you get that muscle memory to hear the Lord, to depend on him in those places where you just desperately need him.
Mm. Yes. Oh my gosh, Cynthia, this is so good. Oh man,
You're so fun, Molly. I
you're
mean,
so
really,
fun.
you want to be best friends, or is that awkward?
No, it's not bad. It's not awkward
I
at
could be your
all.
mentor. Wait, I could be your what is it called when someone that's really older than you? I guess it's a
You're not
mentor.
that much older than me, but
Oh, got a decade on you.
that's
Ish.
fine.
Plus. Whatever. It's fine, everyone. I have an 8-year-old. Surely I'm young again.
I have an 8-year-old too. See, we're basically the same.
We're basically the same, and we love Diet Coke, everyone. It's
I
great. And
know.
we've
I
written a
know.
book, and we're not sure we even are good writers, but
I know.
publishers like us. So there
I
you
know.
go.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. But really, yes, we can be besties. And Cynthia, also, I really appreciate your honesty, your candor, and just how you have um you've just in such an unfiltered and beautiful way really helped people to understand that like life is messy, that all of it is imperfect, but God is so good. And
Mm,
when you can actually learn to almost embrace the mess
mhm.
and to just be like, yeah, this is part of it. And it's what makes life beautiful.
Yeah.
That is what gives us room for growth and to really like live the lives that, so that when we're in our 80s, like, and we're out of F's, like, it's just,
That's the title of this episode now, everyone, except it's not. But
it's not,
no,
but it is.
and you're right. And here's the thing. I would say, if I can add one other thing, Molly, to
Please.
that. I was in this interview the other day. It was like a TV one, and the host asked me a question that I hadn't ever been asked, and he said, "Do you ever question the goodness of God?" And I was like, "What a great question. Do you ever question the goodness of God?" And somebody listening may be there, be like, "Yeah, I mean, life has been more than messy for me." And I would say this: I don't question God's goodness, but I question often his methodology and his timing. Sometimes I'm like, why are you making me wait on this? Why am I watching friends who have a son that's passing away, and you are going to heal him, but on the other side of this earth, and why, and the methodology of how God does things. But I would say this, and it's my hope in reading this book for you guys too, that we can all relate to the fact that life does get messy and hard and off script, and that's okay. Like we don't have to live curated. We don't have to have a life that looks like what we want our social media post to look like. It's okay, because in that is when you really do see God's goodness. And in the hardest places I've walked, I never would have wished for, learning differences in my kids, financial stuff early on, in those places where I've really seen that God is good. He is good. Do I question sometimes his timing, his methodology? Absolutely. I'm human. My mind is only so big. It's finite, right? But God really is good. And that would be my hope as you listen today and laugh with us, that like, listen, life is going to get hard and tricky. Do the foundational things so that you know him, you hear from him, and you're able to say on the other side of it, as you're pushing not your 40th birthday, but your 50th, you're able to look back and say like, yeah, God really is good. I've seen him do it over and over again.
Man, perfect place to end. Cynthia, this has been amazing. For the listeners, I will have all the links in the show notes to where you can connect with Cynthia, listen to her podcast, Mesmerized, pick up this book, Life is Messy, God is Good, Sanity for the Chaos of Everyday Life. You need this book. Let me tell you, you need this book. Cynthia, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for who you are.
Loved every second of it. Thanks, Molly.